So, what happens when political reality gets so strange, it actually starts to feel like something you'd read in a book? Today, we're going to dive into that. We'll look at a case study from the UK, where a series of just unbelievable political scandals led to some truly wild comedy. We'll see how satire, of all things, became maybe the only tool that made any sense at the chaos.
This question, it became absolutely central in the UK during a scandal that really pushed public trust to the absolute limit. And, it wasn't just about the rules themselves. It was about something much deeper, that fundamental contract between a government and the people it's supposed to serve.
Okay, so to really get the satirical response, we've got to look at what was actually happening in the real world first. These events were the raw material. Because without this context, the comedy might just seem, well, bizarre. But once you have it, you see that it's actually an incredibly powerful form of commentary.
So, the scandal got the name Partygate from the media, and it pretty much unfolded in these dramatic stages. First, the public was under an incredibly strict lockdown. I mean, people couldn't see dying relatives or go to funerals. At the same time, all these parties were allegedly happening right at the heart of government. Then came the denials. And then, the police actually started issuing fines. It just created this absolute firestorm.
This quote, it just nails the heart of the public anger, and it's a point our source material really drives home. The issue wasn't just, a simple mistake. It was the perceived hypocrisy of it all. The lawmaker becoming the lawbreaker, especially during a time when the entire nation was making these huge shared sacrifices.
So then, the central issue wasn't even just the parties. It was the accusation of misleading Parliament. And as commentators and our sources pointed out, this immediately brought up comparisons to the Profumo affair, way back in the 1960s. That scandal set a huge historical precedent. A minister had to resign for that exact same offense. So it just highlighted how serious this kind of charge really was.
All right, so how on earth does comedy respond to all that? Well, when real-life events feel this absurd, art has a funny way of mirroring that absurdity. This whole political mess provided a mountain of material for satirists, and they just took that chaos and ran with it.
One of our key sources here is a satirical podcast called The Strange Mole Show. And what they do is they transform these political crises into this absolutely dizzying world of skits and allegories. They take the news, which already feels like it was written by a scriptwriter, and they just turn it into this explicit and often very bizarre performance.
This line from one of the podcast sketches just perfectly captures the feeling of the whole moment. You have this character realizing the situation has gone way beyond a simple comparison. It's become this complex, layered story where everything stands for something else. It's all just spiraling beyond what we can normally comprehend.
So, to really critique this chaos, the satirists in our sources used a pretty specific set of tools. Let's take a look at the key techniques they deployed to deconstruct everything that was going on.
First up, and this one is huge, they use parody. They take these familiar media formats that we all recognize, like game shows or celebrity cooking segments, and they twist them to reflect the political mess, using the very structure of entertainment to expose the failures of governance.
And they used a massive range of formats. Our source material has sketches that frame politics as this twisted game show called The Price is Right Wing, or as a dark, grim TV soap opera. It's a clever technique, really. It reframes these complex political failings as a kind of broken, almost morbid entertainment for the masses.
In probably the most elaborate allegory, a parody of a Christmas cooking special presents the whole succession of prime ministers as this grotesque dish they call the Tory turducken. Every single step in this bizarre recipe is a sharp, satirical jab at a specific leader's time in office and the overall state of the party.
The sources also lean really heavily into caricature, which is another classic tool of the satirist. They portray political leaders not as these serious figures making calculated moves, but as these exaggerated, almost farcical pantomime characters. For instance, the opposition leader Keir Starmer gets satirized as Cool Keir. The whole caricature is of this very serious man trying desperately to seem relatable and cool by trying on all these different personas, playing football, DJing, only to be told he's just fundamentally too awkward. The satire paints this picture of someone trying very, very hard, but just remaining completely out of touch.
So, all of these satirical tools, the parodies, the caricatures, the wild allegories, they're all really pointing to a much deeper theme, this perceived total collapse of trust in public institutions.
And the satire isn't just aimed at politicians. It's reflecting a feeling that you find in the source commentary, a sense of profound disillusionment. The government gets portrayed as incompetent and corrupt, the police as heavy-handed, and certain parts of the media as nothing more than government mouthpieces.
Right at the heart of this breakdown in trust is how the COVID-19 pandemic was handled. I mean, behind all the political games and scandals, there was this immense human cost. And that's a fact the satire brings into sharp, painful focus, especially in one song that keeps coming back to this number right here.
This is how satire works. It just cuts right through all the political spin to ask a question that's devastatingly direct. This line comes from a parody song about the pandemic death toll, and it just moves right past all the partisan bickering to confront the real-world consequences of political decisions. It's asking, what is the true measure of accountability here?
So, where does all this leave the average citizen? When you're faced with a political landscape that feels both tragic and like a total farce, the sources suggest you're at a fork in the road. You can either slide into apathy, or you can choose to take action.
One of the most striking satirical allegories for this is a sketch that's set in a kind of post-apocalyptic vault, like from the game Fallout. You have these citizens who are hiding from the toxic fallout of the great poisoning of democracy. They're content to live in this controlled, sterile little box rather than face the messy reality outside. It's just a powerful metaphor for choosing to be willfully ignorant.
And that idea, it directly echoes a warning from our political commentary source. The belief that they're all the same is a really dangerous trap because it breeds hopelessness. And when people feel hopeless, they slide into apathy, into inaction. And that just allows a broken status quo to continue on, completely unchallenged.
But the sources don't just leave us in despair. The satirical podcast actually offers a way out. In one of the skits, a character comes from an alternate timeline and suggests that the only way to counter a broken system is with new engagement, by mobilizing the huge number of people who don't typically vote at all.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. When the political world itself starts to look like a comedy, full of absurd characters and unbelievable plot twists, maybe the most serious and radical thing a citizen can do is just refuse to be a passive member of the audience.